Well, Ally, it's a thrill to welcome you to Win Today.
Thanks. It's so good to be here. Thanks for having me.
I'm really excited about today's conversation. In fact, Ally, I want to start our conversation where you started your brand new book. And you said that most people go through their whole lives without ever truly expressing themselves. You wrote, "We have stories to tell, ideas to share, dreams of the future, visions and versions of ourselves that want permission to live and to breathe in the physical world." The listeners are nodding their heads right now because we won't let them. Instead, you wrote, Ally, "We silently coach ourselves to sit down, follow the rules, be more reasonable, and tend to our responsibilities. And of
Mm.
course, keep the peace." Here's the question, Ally. What is the cost of holding back what is trying to be expressed through each and every one of us?
So much is at stake. I mean, when you think even just one person's life, if I ask this question of myself, what does the world miss if I don't really lean into my story and live the truths that I know are true and chase the dreams that I know I want to chase and become the person that I know I can become in this lifetime? If I could measure, if there was any way to kind of measure what the world would miss out on if I didn't allow myself to evolve in those ways and then multiply that by the number of human beings that live on this planet, I don't think there is a way to even conceptualize what we would all miss out on as a people. Although I think what we can see when we look around the world and what's happening right now in the world, the intense division, the hatred, the violence, the um, just the infighting, the name calling, the judgment, the all the things that we're seeing happen on social media and in the world right now. I think what we're seeing is the opposite of this. We're seeing what happens when people don't have access to the truth of themselves. And because they don't have access to the truth of themselves, they can't see the beauty of that in somebody else. And so what we get is sort of like a world that's collapsing in on itself. I think the antidote to what we're seeing unfold in our modern world is exactly what I wrote about in this book. I think it's people really understanding the beauty of who they are through understanding their story and expressing that in a clear way.
Mm. Well, as a primer for today, Ally, if we could, can you take us into your own life experiences,
Hmm.
to the extent you're comfortable sharing, of course, and share how this important subject came to be?
Yeah, well, this has been my career for a really long time, but it didn't become personal to me until a couple of years ago. By that, I mean, I left my full time job to enter into the world of publishing back in 2010. So it's been 11 years now. I have written several books myself. I've coached hundreds of authors to help them get their books out in the world in a traditional publishing sense. I've also built online courses to help people self publish their books. So I've been working like with people and their stories and books for the last 11 years of my life.
Mm.
But it was 5 years ago that this concept of personal story and the idea that writing could be such a powerful tool for transformation in our lives became personal to me because I went through a divorce, which was something that I never in a million years imagined that I'd be going through. And as my marriage was falling apart and disintegrating, and I was walking away from everything that I had known to be true about my life, I decided I was going to do something that I had coached other people to do in my years of coaching and training writers. And that was I was going to write down the story. So I decided to start recording the events that were taking place in my life, record the memories that were kind of haunting me from the marriage, start asking myself so many of the questions I was asking myself anyway, like, how could this happen to me? How could he do this to me? Like, why would this take place in my life? What did I do wrong? Asking all those questions and answering them through the act of writing. And as I wrote down the story, I realized that was the very thing that was helping me to reshape my relationship to the story, which I realize is the most important thing that we have. So, the way that I would have told my story before I wrote it down was this kind of like, poor me, this awful thing happened to me. I can't believe he did this to me kind of story. And then after I wrote down the story, the way that I tell the story is very different. It's um, like to me, it's this very impressive story of someone who overcame insurmountable obstacles to become the person she was always meant to be in the world.
I mean, that leans into the very topic we're talking about, the power of writing things down. I'd love to know if we could just kind of double click on your life even more.
Yeah.
When you wrote down your story and read it back, what happened on the inside? I'm talking about your emotional health, your mental health, perhaps even
Yeah.
inside your physiology.
Yeah. Well, the first thing that happened is I wrote down the first draft of the story. And just like so many people, when you come to the first draft of your story, there's a messiness to the first draft that's really, really necessary. But I want to talk about this from a mental health perspective, because when I sat down to write the first draft of this story about what had happened to me through my marriage and my divorce, my approach to the process was, I'm going to tell the truth that I haven't gotten to tell before. So I'm
Mm,
not holding anything back. I'm going to tell all the nitty gritty details. I'm putting everything down on the page. I'm not going to protect him. I'm going to say everything. I'm not keeping his secrets anymore. That attitude and mentality was at the moment healing for me, because I had for so long kind of been tiptoeing around trying to make sure I didn't say anything that would upset him, or
mhm,
anything that would, like, get me in trouble in the relationship, anything that would paint him in a bad light. So it was helpful for me in a sense to sit down and write everything exactly the way that it had happened. But then what happened is when I went back to read through the story, just like you're talking about, and I read it back start to finish, I realized I didn't like the tone that I was telling the story in. It didn't sound like me, first of all, but it also just didn't sound like someone who I wanted to be. To be totally frank, when I read it back, I was kind of like, this girl sounds bitter. She sounds mean. She sounds like she's kind of playing the victim a little bit, and she sounds like a whiny little teenager. Like, she just sounds like, well, like, I can't believe he did this, did that. And to be fair, there were so many circumstances that I endured within the relationship that were really unfair. I was mistreated. There's no way around that. However, I don't know if you get what I'm talking about when I say there was a tone. There was just a tone of a woman who was sort of acting like, well, I couldn't have done anything. I had no control. I'm not sure what I was supposed to do. Rather than the tone of the woman who I wanted to be, who I hoped I was inside of myself, which was like, I don't accept being treated like that, or
mm,
um, I don't have to stay with a person who's going to, put me in danger. So I saw that I needed to make a shift from the old tone to a new tone. And when I sat down to do the second draft of the manuscript, that was when I really started to shift my internal tone in order to get the tone to show up differently on the page. And that process of editing shifted my neurobiology. It shifted the way that I felt about myself in my life. It shifted the way that I acted, that I responded, that I shifted my habits and my patterns. It shifted the way I felt about myself. So it was really powerful for me. And it's not just powerful for me. I mean, the data around this is really compelling. And I talk about this in my new book, but the data shows that writing, even as little as 20 minutes a day for 4 days in a row, can measurably improve your mood. I think a lot of the reason why it does this is exactly what I'm talking about, is that it forces us to look at the tone that we're taking in our lives, to look at the frame that we have around our experiences, and to, when necessary, reevaluate those and shift them so that they're more empowering.
mm. I'm really excited about this conversation because you already tip your hat to neurobiology and the neuroscience of the subconscious, the limbic system. And I want to suggest before we move on, Allie, that the realized tone comes from attitude comes from beliefs come from
Yes.
thoughts, and
Yeah.
those thoughts are from lived experiences
Yeah.
that have been recorded into the subconscious, and now the tape plays back and
Yep.
you're living out of the automation. And having written those experiences down, and guys, you're listening to this saying, okay, what does this mean for me? Well, I'd like to suggest, to Allie's point, you go through a difficult circumstance. In writing it down, you see objectively what you only felt and tried to relate to from the inside out. And Allie, it's just really, really, really powerful. This is fun because I could take this in so many different directions,
Yeah.
but I want to stay disciplined here. And before we talk about the power, because we're going to dive into this, the power of writing things down, I want to zoom out quickly and talk about the power of words. Because
Okay.
obviously words came out of tone, right?
Sure.
Life and death, the Bible says, is in the power of the tongue, and off of the tongue roll what? Words. Talk about that quickly, and then we'll dive in.
I mean, the power of words can't be underestimated. Words are, I talk about this all the time, but we think of writing as this sort of elite activity that only a certain group of people get to use. But imagine what your life would be like without words. You would have no way to communicate to another human being. You would have no way to name and understand your own experience, even just, therapists talk about as affect labeling, like just being able to label an experience is a way to steal the emotional charge from it. If you didn't have words, you wouldn't have any way to do that. If you didn't have words, you wouldn't have any way to tell somebody that you love them or care about them. You wouldn't have any way to ask for what you needed. You couldn't even go to a restaurant and order some food. So words are like woven into the very fabric of our being. They're part of every single aspect of our lives. And the written word in particular allows us to, from a distance, communicate something with someone that, we wouldn't even have that connection with them if we didn't have the written word. So there's no way to overestimate the importance of words and the importance of the written word in particular. The written word in particular is important because although we have, verbally, we have the spoken word and we also have the written word. But when you sit down to write a word on a piece of paper, you're actually accessing a part of your brain that you don't access when you speak that word out loud. This is why writing can be so powerful for us, because if I'm talking to you and you ask me a question, I'm going to answer the question one way. But if I sat down to answer the question through writing, I'm going to answer the question a different way because I'm accessing a different part of my brain. And you talked about a minute ago, you listed sort of the cognitive behavioral model, which is like you have an experience in your life that creates a thought pattern that leads to a feeling, that leads to a reaction, that leads to a result. That pattern is playing in the subconscious part of our brain. And if we are only talking about what we think or how we feel and we never sit down and write about it, we're never really getting to those tapes that are on repeat in our subconscious mind. So, to choose not to access the power of writing says, I'm only going to really deal with the stuff that's happening in my conscious mind. You can never change the thoughts that are automated in your subconscious mind, which means over 80% of your daily habits and behavior can never even be touched. So there's really a lot to lose by not using the written word.
Just to make things clear, then, just distill it down, what is the inherent power in writing things down? I mean, just practical short and long-term benefits.
So the power is accessing that limbic part of your brain, which means that you can find the thoughts that are buried in your subconscious mind that are just like you're talking about, the tapes that are playing, that are on repeat, that are driving your daily behavior. You can pull them up into your conscious mind. You can evaluate them and see, do I still want these thoughts to live there or don't I? And then if and when it's needed, you can reshape those thoughts. So like the beginning of the year is a really great time for us to talk about this because everyone's doing their New Year's resolutions. And the reality of the matter is by the time February gets here, most people have abandoned their New Year's resolutions completely.
Yep.
And after a year like 2020, most of us, I think, decided like, we're not doing New Year's resolutions anymore because that was such a mess of a year. But I think part of the reason why we get frustrated with New Year's resolutions is we're approaching them incorrectly, or we're approaching them in a way that's just not very effective. If you're approaching your New Year's resolutions from your conscious mind, your prefrontal cortex, as I talk about in the book, you're just not going to make very much progress. You can only make as much progress as you have discipline. So those of us who are very type A and we're very disciplined, you'll make more progress than other people, but even you will fall short at the end of the day. Before you get to February, you're going to have a day where you're feeling tired. You're just not feeling up to it. A day where something else is distracting you and has your attention, and you're not going to be able to do the thing that you hoped you were able to do. It isn't until you can go down into your unconscious mind and access your thoughts that are there that you really figure out why you're behaving in the way that you're behaving, and then what you need to do in order to reshape the thought so that you can produce new behavior. So for example, let's just say, I'm coming up with this example on the fly, but let's just say that every night when you're going to bed, you have 2 or maybe 3 glasses of wine. And you ask yourself, every time you do it, you think like, that's stupid. I don't even want to drink 3 glasses of wine. I don't like the way that I feel when I drink 3 glasses of wine. And you might say to yourself, like, this year I'm giving up drinking, or this year I'm only having 1 glass. And you might be able to execute on that, every night for the first 3 weeks of January. But then you have a bad day boss really stresses you out, your spouse is upset with you, they're yelling at you, you're just like, forget it, I'm having a glass of wine. So you have a glass of wine and you think you're going to stop at one, but then you find yourself going to three, for the same thing that we've all been through, right? Where we're like, what am I doing? Why am I doing this to myself? Why am I doing the very thing that I don't want to do? And the answer to that question is because there's a thought or an idea buried in your unconscious mind that you don't know is there that's causing you to behave in the way that you're behaving. Most of us don't know the thought exists there. What we know about is the feeling. So you know the feeling that comes right before you drink 3 glasses of wine, but you don't even know the thought is there. And because you don't know the thought is there, until you identify the thought, until you use a tool like affect labeling to put words to it, until you write it down, and until you reshape it, the behavior will keep repeating itself.
Is that where the hang up comes into play? You wrote about the hang up early on in the book, and it almost kind of took on a theme, if you will. But I want to poke that box. Talk about the hang up, what it is, and really how it manifests.
So the hang up is that feeling that so many of us have deep in our guts that something's off in our lives. And usually the tricky thing with the hang up is it's not a big thing that's off. It's usually like, most of my life is pretty good. I have a lot to be thankful for. Things are going kind of great. But there's this one thing, or there's this sense that like something is not quite right. Something is a little bit off. And the reason why this is so important is because until most of us will do with the hang up is most of us will just say like, what I really need to do is just have more gratitude. I'm going to start a gratitude journal. I'm just going to write down the things that I'm thankful for. Or so many other people have it worse than me. I don't know why I would complain about my life. I'm just going to forget about it. I'm going to pretend like that feeling's not there. The reason why that's a problem is the hang up is communicating to you the very thing that needs to like click into place in order for you to access all the power, all the energy, all of the life, all of the joy that you have to contribute to the world in this short life that we get to live on this planet. And most of us are just pretending like the hang up isn't there. Most of us are just ignoring it. So what I teach you to do in the book is to not only listen to the hang up, but to learn to understand what it's telling you through a practice like writing, so that you can use the information that it's giving you to make the necessary adjustments in your life so that you can feel not just, mostly okay, but you can feel like you're really aligned with your purpose.
Yeah, that's really good. Well, there's a manifestation out of the stress and when we live in the hang up, if you will. And I think it is anxiety. Ally, I want to spend some time talking about the correlation between writing things down and the manifestation of anxiety. This is really personal for me recently, right now. I'll just say it. I've walked through some scary medical stuff recently, and I tend to create a movie inside my head, but what I've done is written down what was said to me as fact. I have actually a little stack of index cards right back here. I write down what was said, what's truth, and then I supplement it with actual truth from the Word of God, fact versus truth. So not only does it keep me from going down the spiral into the unknown, but I'm practicing renewing my mind with truth. So back to the question, I'd love for you to teach this out more, the correlation between anxiety and writing things down.
Well, the act of writing is an incredible antidote to anxiety. If people out there, I have lived with anxiety for most of my life, and I've been medicated for it on various occasions. And, the extent to which I still live with it for the most part is like just a matter of daily management. But I want to preface this by just saying, if there are people out there who are living with panic attacks or who are living with really intense anxiety, there's no shame in seeking help for that. And
That's
even
right.
if that help includes pharmaceuticals, there's no reason why you need to be suffering on a daily basis under anxiety. But if you're dealing with just sort of like a low level sense of anxiety around the events of our world, as so many of us are right now, just a sense that like things are kind of unsteady. I don't have both of my feet on the ground. I don't have access to all the right information. I don't really know what's going to happen next. It feels like 2020 was like one trauma after another trauma after another trauma after another trauma. And where that leaves us is we don't know when the next trauma is coming. So it wouldn't be surprising to me if a lot of people who are listening to this are living with what I would call a low grade anxiety that's that's just part of our daily lives. And writing can be an incredible antidote for that kind of anxiety. Here's the reason: because writing gives us a way to metabolize the events of our life, to make sense of them, so that we can sort of file them away in the file cabinet and they don't take up a ton of space in our brain. What I mean by metabolize is this works just like your metabolism, where when you eat food, your metabolism takes in what you've eaten, it breaks it down, it pulls out what nutrients are good for you so that it can put it to work, and then it takes the waste and it discards it. We need a similar kind of system with our lives, because we're faced with like the input of negative images, of violence, of like tragedies all around the world, of tragedies in our own lives, of things that happen to us on a daily basis. We need a system for sort of pulling that into our space, breaking it down, figuring out where the nutrients are, pulling those into our process, and then just discarding the waste. Otherwise, what ends up happening is the system gets backed up. And imagine if you were eating food and you didn't have a digestive system, your body would become toxic. And the same thing is true with our lives. If we're pulling in all of these images and we're pulling in all of these experiences and we don't have a way to break them down, then our environments become toxic. Truly, even the things that are really good for us become toxic because we don't have a way to compartmentalize them. So writing can act as a tool for us, those of us who feel that anxiety, to better understand the things that are happening in our world, better understand the things that happen to us in our lives, and to kind of put them in their proper compartment so that they're not just all floating around in this kind of like existential chaos that I think so many of us feel like we're living in right now.
Ally, if people are listening right now and saying, okay, writing things down, what are you talking about? Do you mean I have to write a book? Is this journaling? Is this writing things down on a Post-it? I'd love to know.
Yeah, the term that I use in the book is the term that's used in the research, and that's expressive writing. So the definition of expressive writing just means writing your deepest thoughts and feelings about a particular subject. So it's really that simple. For most people, a word like journaling is helpful because we all know what journaling is. Many of us have tried it before. You might have even had an experience with journaling that was very cathartic for you. The reason I don't use the term journaling in the book is it doesn't really have to look like journaling. It doesn't have to be all included in like one journal. You don't have to sit down at the same journal every day and write on the next page. You don't have to put the date at the top. You don't even really have to write in complete sentences. Expressive writing could be, like writing one word in the middle of a page that I'm going to meditate on or reflect on for a few minutes. It could be like bullet pointing a quick list in the morning of like, the top 10 things that are on my mind right now. It could be writing a quick note to self. I do this all the time. Like, I'll just write like, note to self, you do not have to hustle to earn someone's love, or something like that. Like just a quick note to myself to remind myself of something. It could be like an affirmation to yourself. It could be a prayer. So there are so many different ways that this can look that I don't want people to get stuck in thinking that it has to be a particular way, the way we think of journaling. I want people to open their minds and know that like you could record a little note to yourself in the notes section on your iPhone. You could scribble something on a cocktail napkin. You could write in dry erase marker on your mirror in the morning. There's so many different ways that you can do this and still access the power of the written word.
Well, it's really helpful. I was just going to ask, is it as effective, let's say if we have an Evernote document or the Notes app, for us to type versus having pen in hand, writing with our handwriting? Is there any science behind the difference in the two exercises?
The science shows that it's slightly more effective for you to write with pen and paper than it is for you to write with your device.
Okay.
Now, that said, the difference is slight enough that I always tell people, if it's going to prevent you from actually doing your writing, then don't worry about it. If you feel like you're just trying to decide whether I should use my computer or I should use a piece of paper, then use a piece of paper. But if it's going to prevent you from doing your writing because you don't have paper with you, or because you're just not the type of person who likes to write by hand, it hurts your hand, or you can't keep, sometimes like people say, I can't write fast enough, so my brain moves too fast and my hand can't keep up. If that's the case for you, then don't worry about it. You just use what you have and do what you can with that. So don't let that get in your way. But if you're wanting to know which is more effective, the truth is it's a bit more effective from a brain science perspective to use pen and paper.
That's really helpful. In the book, you talked about the science of 20 minutes of writing each day, but then also you encouraged people, listen, if you don't have 20, distill it down to 10 or 5 or even maybe one word. But I'd love to spend some time on the science behind 20 minutes of writing.
Mm-hmm. Well, the data shows that writing for as little as 20 minutes a day for 4 days in a row can produce a measurable improvement in your mood. And there's a whole other list of things that
Wow.
it does for you too. Yeah, it strengthens your immune system. People who write for as little as 20 minutes a day for 4 days in a row will visit the doctor up to 50% less often for upper respiratory infections and flu for up to 6 months. So this is crazy. Like, imagine this: for 4 days this week, if you wrote for 20 minutes at a time, the data shows that you will get sick 50% less often in the next 6 months. So
That's wild.
Totally wild, right? And especially, I really love sharing this piece of data in the midst of a global pandemic when everyone's worried about their physical health, because not like we shouldn't be doing other things to practically take care of our physical health. But the idea that writing could have such a tremendous impact on our physiology and on our biology and on our cells, imagine the kind of impact that it could have in every other area of your life.
Oh, that's powerful.
The thing that I teach people to do, though, so the data shows, it's 20 minutes in 4 days. I think it's much more effective if you can build a regular habit of writing into your life, which is why I tell people, if you don't feel that you have 20 minutes, start with 5.
Mm-hmm.
And some people listening to this are going to think, like, 20 minutes, that's nothing. I can totally do 20 minutes of writing. And other people are going to say 20 minutes, that's a lot. I feel like I've been both of those people, because I have a 5-month-old daughter. And before she was born, I was like, 20 minutes. Well, who can't find 20 minutes in their day? And then after she was born, I was like, 20 minutes is a lot.
Sure.
So if 20 minutes feels like a lot to you, don't feel like you have to start with 20 minutes. Feel like you can start with 5 or with 2 or with 1. Start with writing down one word that describes how you feel today, and see if you're able to access something that you weren't able to access before you were writing it down. Start with 2 minutes, start with 5 minutes, start with 10, whatever you can offer to it today. What I would start with is something that feels really realistic for you, that you can do every single day, so that you can build this helpful habit into your daily life.
I wanted to double click on the growth side of this. You've tipped your hat to the fact that by writing things down, we're naming our experiences in order that we might fully understand them. But can we double click on that? Is there anything else listeners need to know about that, and just to galvanize this principle?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that happens when you write down a story is you're able to frame it in a different way. So what I mean by framing is, if I were to bring you into my house and I were like, we redid the floors in here before we moved in. You should have seen the floors before. They were really terrible. I got to show them to you. This wood is like really special. We had it shipped over from wherever else. We had the floors shipped over from England, and we had this special guy come in and he stained them in this beautiful way. And you just got to and you'll be so amazed at the floors. And I show you around the house and I point out the floors a bunch of times. And then we leave the house and I ask you, like, what color was the ceiling? You're going to have no idea what color the ceiling was, because you were looking at the floors the whole time, because that's how I framed it for you. That's how I framed your experience of coming into my house.
Yeah.
So how we frame our experience really matters, because it points our attention towards something. So a reframe of a story can be incredibly powerful, because it shifts your attention from looking at one thing to looking at another thing. I'll give you an example of how I did this for myself really recently.
I love this.
So
yeah.
I told you my daughter, I have a 5-month-old daughter. So she was born in July 25th of 2020, right in the midst of the pandemic. And my husband and I at the time were living in Los Angeles when numbers for COVID were crazy and out of control. And it was a very scary time to give birth. In addition to that, because I was worried about COVID, I had moved the birth from a hospital to a birth center. But when I went into labor, my blood pressure immediately skyrocketed. My daughter was not doing well. So I checked into the birth center and they were immediately like, you can't be here. We're sending you to the hospital. So they sent me over to the hospital, which just meant, because of COVID times, it was, my husband couldn't come in with me. He had to pass a health inspection. It took him like 3.5 hours to pass the health inspection. I was having contractions 2 minutes apart. My daughter wasn't her vital. She wasn't breathing very well. There were all these like complications that happened. She ended up spending a week in the NICU. The entire experience was, I would have told you at the time, incredibly traumatic. It was worst case scenario. It was like everything that I had wanted to happen with the birth went the opposite way. I was so upset with how this all unfolded. It was just, everything different than how I wanted it to be, that's how it happened. um, Now, after the birth was over, I was telling a friend about this. I was explaining the story to her, and I was like, it was so traumatic. It was awful. She said to me, when I hear you tell this story, Ally, do you want to know what I hear? I hear this badass woman who literally overcame every obstacle that was thrown in her path to bring her daughter into the world safely. And she said, I think a better question is, I had gone into the birth experience wanting to have a natural birth experience. I was going to give birth in the tub, like whatever. Everybody has a different like idea about all that stuff. But that was what I wanted going into the experience. And then I'm like, I had an epidural. I can't overstate like how different the experience was than how I wanted it to be. And she said, I feel like the question isn't, did you have a natural birth? The question is, did you feel empowered by your birth experience? Like, do you walk away from the experience going, I feel like a badass. Like I did that. I brought her into the world. Like I am amazing. And so do you see the reframe that's happening there? The reframe from focusing on these specifics, like I didn't want to have an epidural and I did have an epidural, or I wanted to give birth in the tub and I didn't give birth in the tub, or I wanted to be at the birth center and I didn't, or, I wanted to do it without an IV fluids and I had to have IV fluids, or whatever, all these things. Rather than focusing on that, she said, like, why don't you focus on the fact that you're amazing, you're incredible, you brought this child into the world. So I decided to sit down, just like I do for everything in my life, and just write out the story and write it with that different frame. I wanted to see if I could tell the story with the tone of I'm amazing, instead of the tone of no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get the birth to go the way that I wanted it to go. And this is such a powerful tool for us in our lives, because the reality of the matter is, and most of us are feeling this in a heavy way at the end of 2020, the reality of the matter is you don't have control over the circumstances of your lives. You can want things to go a certain way, and that doesn't mean that they go that way. But when the story is all said and done, the question I have is, how am I telling the story to myself? Because the way that I tell the story to myself will make a difference as to whether I feel empowered or disempowered. It will make a difference as to whether I feel confident or lacking confidence. It will make a difference as to whether I feel, like connected to God and to the divine, and feel like I was safe and protected, or as to whether I feel sort of forgotten and lost inside of all of that. So the way that we tell ourselves our own stories really matters. In fact, far more than we ever give it credit for.
I'm so fascinated right now because the result of what you just said, guys, please lean into this. Your biochemicals are affected inside your physiology. Your emotions are affected. When you reframe things in a positive way, all of a sudden you're not spitting out the cortisol that you probably would have done in another way. And now you're dealing with all the physical side effects. I mean, this is truly, truly, truly fascinating. In fact, Ally, I got to tell you, we joked about this before we started recording today, but Dr. Joe Dispenza has been such an inspiration to me. And when you wrote about him, I'd love to know, even inside of this, let's just stay inside of this topic for a moment. What did you learn from studying Dr. Joe Dispenza's work, even regarding the brain and genetics and what you just shared? And actually, real fast, I got to tell you this. This is fun. My niece was born July 5th, 2019. So.
Oh, I love that. July babies. So good.
Babies. My sister, it's funny. We were hanging out on the 4th of July at her house, and we now joke to say that the fireworks overhead pushed her into labor, but we'll see.
Yeah. I mean, I like to believe I went into labor early too, and I'm definitely a believer that it was the stress of all of everything.
Absolutely. Anyway, sorry, I had to divert back into Joe Dispenza. I mean, genetics, brain, reframing, it's powerful. What'd you learn?
So one of my favorite things that I learned from Joe Dispenza was a little bit of a deeper dive onto what's actually happening inside of your body when you create or manifest your own reality, as so many people talk about out there in the self-help world. I had heard that so many times before, that like you create or manifest your own reality. And I was like, I think I believe that seems kind of true. And from a psychological perspective, it seems true. My dad's a therapist, and I have read a ton of psychology books. I was a psychology minor in college. And so I was like, from a therapeutic perspective, that seems true, but also like, how much control do we really have over manifesting our own reality? And what I learned from Joe Dispenza was, you have like a neuron that fires when you have a thought that travels from one location to another location. And when that neuron fires, there's a cocktail of chemicals that's released into your body that causes you to feel in a certain way. And when you feel in that certain way, we have trained automated responses that take place, that grow out of that feeling. And that response almost always creates the very reality that we're trying to avoid. So it's the cognitive behavioral model we were talking about earlier. It's like a fact of my life takes place, something happens to me that I don't have control over. Then I have a thought that I attach to that. That thought, that's the neuron firing, traveling that pathway. That thought has a cocktail of chemicals attached to it that's specific to me and that's released into my body that causes me to feel a feeling. Then that has a reaction or a response, a way that I respond to feeling that way. And then that creates a reality that I wish didn't exist. So the example I gave you earlier about the wine, let's just walk through this for a second. I'm going to actually start this from the feeling perspective, because usually that's the easiest place to start.
Okay.
So if I have a cocktail of chemicals that's released into my body that makes me feel a certain way, maybe the feeling is kind of like stress mixed with guilt or shame, mixed with anger and frustration. It's like a particular cocktail of chemicals. That might be the feeling that causes me to react by pulling out the bottle of wine and pouring myself a glass, even though I don't really want to drink it. When I react in that way, the result I get is I drink 3 glasses of wine, and then I wake up the next morning thinking, why did I do that? I didn't even want to do that. So what we have to figure out is usually the piece of the puzzle that we don't know off the top of our heads is the second piece of the puzzle, the feeling, which is then attached to the first piece of the puzzle, which is the fact from our life. So this is where we have to do the investigative work, and it's where writing comes in, because I can usually identify the feeling, and then I know the response and I know the result that I get. But if I back that up to step 2, which is the thought, I have to try to identify what's the thought that I'm having, that neuron that's firing, that's traveling that path, that's creating that particular cocktail of chemicals. So identifying that, writing is a really helpful tool to help you identify that, because you could just sit down and free write and ask yourself the question, what's the thought I'm having that's playing on repeat in my head that's causing me to feel that way? Maybe the thought is like, nobody cares about me. So I live through a work day and my boss is mad at me and my spouse is mad at me. I'm not, I'm feeling like I'm not living up to anybody's expectations for me. Nobody even cares about me. No one, gives a crap about me. That thought firing causes me to feel that cocktail of emotions, which causes me to pour the glass of wine, which causes me to drink the 3 glasses that I wish I didn't drink. And when I can identify that and pull it up from my subconscious mind into my conscious mind, now I have the power to reshape it. Now I actually have most of the time when you identify the thought, you think like, that's not really true. Plenty of people care about me. Mm-hmm. But that thought has been planted there from an earlier experience in life, which is why it's happening like outside of our conscious awareness. So anyway, that may be more than what you were looking for, but that's really the piece to the puzzle that I learned from Joe Dispenza that like made it click for me. Is I'm like, oh, so that the cocktail of chemicals that's released into my body is actually the memorized emotion that now it really doesn't matter what happens to me in my life. It's going to trigger that cocktail of chemicals, and I'm going to feel that emotion again and again and again, which means I will never stop getting this response, the 3 glasses of wine, until I unwind the whole thing and go all the way back to the beginning and figure out what thought is driving all of that and uproot the thought. That's the only way out. I can't muscle my way through this. I can't self-discipline my way through it. I can't be type A enough. The only way out is to unwind all the way back to the thought and uproot it.
We are chiseling a rock that I'm so passionate about. I feel like in the work that I do, Ally, and one of the things I tell the folks here at Win today is that, the self-help industry in and of itself has a 98% failure rate.
Yes.
Because willpower doesn't work.
It doesn't work.
We we've got to do exactly as you said. It's the inside work. In fact, I remember hearing a story from Joe Dispenza. And basically, he said that if we take an emotion such as gratitude, and this is not mind over matter, guys. It is to say, though, there is power in our thought life. The Bible even
Yeah.
says choose life. Well, how do we choose it? Well, we choose it in our thought life. Choose life that you may live. Well, anyway, gratitude, realizing and experiencing the emotion of gratitude, fires neurochemicals down to the brainstem, which releases synonymous chemicals into the body that correlates to that emotion for health and for life. And I'm just so fascinated by this. And to swing this back into our conversation today, the power of writing things down, guys, when you feel stuck, because a lot of people right now, Ally, feel stuck.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
helping people get unstuck can be achieved when we decide to explore and research within ourselves, pull ourselves out and almost kind of look at our own life from a different perspective. You know, Dr. Caroline Leaf, who's been on the show now 3
Yeah.
times, I love her so much because she has uncovered the power of neuroplasticity, and this is what we're talking about right now. So, Ally, I could spend 2 hours talking
I know. We could.
about this very subject, and it's just a passion point. So thanks for going there.
Yeah, of course. Can I say one more thing that I
I'd
feel like
love
is
for you to say
really
2 or
important?
10
Okay.
if you'd like.
One more thing I feel like is really important is a lot of times in the self-help world, we
Yeah.
get the impression, whether or not teachers mean this, but we get the impression that because our thoughts manifest our reality, that there are good thoughts and there are bad thoughts, and that we should get rid of the bad thoughts and only focus on the good thoughts. And so this is where this idea comes from, that we should like only focus on gratitude and don't think any bad thoughts. And one of the things I love about the power of writing is that it gives you the permission to actually explore the thoughts that are driving the behavior that you wish to change. Because it is only by exploring and acknowledging the quote unquote negative thoughts, the bad thoughts that we wish we didn't have, there's no amount of pretending that can push them out. You can't pretend they're not. And even Joe Dispenza talks about this. He says, faking positivity does not work. Categorically, it will not work. So you can't sort of like willpower your way into being positive enough to manifest a positive reality. What it takes is actually going in to the thoughts that are more complicated, more chaotic, more frustrating, more upsetting, more dark. It takes going into those thoughts, uprooting them, bringing them into the light, and taking a really honest look at them and going, where did this come from? How did this become a part of me? Where did I adopt this from? Is it really serving me, or do I want to let it go and move on to something new? So I think, so many of us need permission. And speaking of anxiety, anxiety is most of the time the manifestation of an emotion you don't want to feel. So most of the time, anxiety is actually a secondary emotion. There's a primary emotion that you don't want to feel, and because you're not letting yourself feel it, you're feeling anxiety instead. For me, it's usually anger. Usually when I'm pissed and I don't want to admit that I'm pissed, that's when I get anxious. When I'm really upset with someone and I'm too scared to admit that I'm upset, that's usually when I get really anxious. So the beauty of the writing life is you can actually unpack your anger in a way that's completely safe with just yourself. You could tear it up and put it in the garbage. You could burn it when you're done. But you can acknowledge the emotion that's going on under the surface and give it some space to breathe, give it some light, give it some attention, give it some care and some compassion. And almost always, when you can give a quote unquote negative emotion or a dark emotion space to live and breathe and permission to exist, almost always it loses all of its charge. So I just want to say that for anyone who's listening, who's feeling like, I've tried the positivity thing, like I've tried to manifest this better reality for myself and it's not worked, that what writing allows you to do is it allows you to actually admit the thoughts and feelings that you're having that feel quite negative in a way that discharges them so that you can release them and move on to something better.
Guys, I want you to pay attention to the severity of that statement, because in so doing, when you release these strangleholds of thoughts that you have by writing them down. What you're also doing is bringing freedom to your emotional health and your physiology. The
Amen.
ramifications are huge.
Just personally in my life, I have experienced, I used to have almost daily panic attacks. I told you I was medicated for anxiety for a long
Mm-hmm.
time. I have not had a panic attack in 3 years, knock on wood, cross my fingers, not had a single panic attack. I used to have crippling food allergies. There were about 10 foods I could eat without pain. Now I can eat anything. As of a year ago, I started to be able to eat gluten again. Gluten was the last one I was allowed to introduce. Um, I could go on and on. I think those two are probably the most glaring difference in my life. Just an ability to move through the world without feeling that crippling anxiety, and an ability to literally eat foods that I couldn't eat before. So if you're wondering if this really can have an effect on your physiology, on your actual biology, I'm living proof that that's true. And, whatever kind of chronic pain or whatever way that you feel that you're suffering right now, I want to speak hope and life and light into that space and promise you that there is a light at the other end of the tunnel. There's no quick fix and there's no magic pill, but writing is one of many tools that are available to us that allow us to heal our bodies from the inside out so that we can enjoy our life on this planet in the way that we were meant to.
That's stunning. Ally, if you would talk to us about inside drama versus outside drama.
Oh, this is such a good time in the world to talk about this. So essentially it's what it sounds like. Outside drama is the stuff that happens in the outside world that's really dramatic, that you can't help. I give examples in the book. While I was writing the book, my sister, who's a healthy 34-year-old woman, had a heart attack, massive heart attack, almost died. There was a tornado that came through my neighborhood in Nashville. I wasn't living here at the time, but it tore up the apartment that I had been living in, tore the complete face off the side of the apartment. I couldn't stop visualizing what it would have been like if I had been living in that apartment at the time. And then COVID hit and my husband lost his business. So like over $1 million in business in one day, he completely lost his income. It was like that all happened in 1 week or 10 days time, from the heart attack to COVID. So that's all outside drama, like the violence that we see on the television, on the news every night. So that's all outside drama, and there's no shortage of it in our world right now. Inside drama is what we choose to do with what happens in the outside. So inside drama is how we torture ourselves, because a week ago, we saw this, everything unfold at the White House. And that's outside drama. But here I am, it's a week later, I'm sitting at my desk. I am safe in Nashville, Tennessee. It's January, what's the date? 11th, 3:54
p.m. Of recording, right?
Yeah. So I say that the time and the date literally just to say, orient yourself in time and space, put both of your feet on the ground, take a deep breath in, take a deep breath out. You're safe, you're fine. But inside drama would be choosing to allow that chaos to kind of disrupt my internal space. And the reason I talk about this in the book is because writing is such a fantastic tool to sort of weed out what we don't need to pay attention to, so that we can clear out our internal space of as much drama as possible, so that we can live a peaceful life. Because it doesn't, so many people feel because there's all this drama happening in the outside world, that I have to feel really dramatic so that I can contribute to the solution of the problem. The fact of the matter is, you will contribute no helpful solutions to the problem until you feel that your internal space is clear. You can't even have access to the answers. Your creativity comes from a clear internal space.
Yep.
So until you can put both feet on the ground and you can orient yourself in space and time, and you can say, I'm okay, I'm safe, I'm good. Until you can feel that way, you can't contribute anything of value to the world. And let me say one more thing, that if you're in a space where you actually don't feel safe in the present moment, let's say that you're living with an abuser, or you don't have access to food, or you don't, if your basic needs are not being met, your whole job is to figure out a way to get those basic needs met. Otherwise, you will never have anything of value. You cannot find anything of value to contribute to the world until your basic needs are met. So you don't have to feel guilty about that. You don't have to feel your whole job is to take good care of yourself until you're at a place where the internal drama is calmed and you feel peaceful inside of yourself.
Ally, as we're landing the plane here today, I want to ask you to spend some time on the infinity prompt, if you would.
Yeah. The infinity prompt is an incredibly powerful tool that gives you infinite number of things to write about. So it uses this idea of expressive writing and also the cognitive behavioral model that we've talked about it a couple of times as a way to help you metabolize your life. The way it works is you choose an event from your life that feels charged. So that could be anything from getting honked at on the street and that kind of bothered you or pissed you off, all the way to like, you know, the loss of a loved one. Choose an event from your life that feels charged, and then you write the facts of the situation first. Then you write your thoughts about the situation second, and then you write your feelings about the situation third. And the idea of the prompt is just to help you, first of all, separate facts from thoughts from feelings, because sometimes we get those conflated.
Sure.
And then also to give you a chance to put pen to paper and see if maybe there are thoughts you have that you didn't know you had, or feelings you have that you didn't know you had. Because once you can pull those into your conscious mind, you now have the power to shape them in a way you didn't before.
That's so powerful. Well, guys, the book, The Power of Writing It Down, A Simple Habit to Unlock Your Brain and Reimagine Your Life. It's available right now everywhere books are sold, but go to wintoday.tv/episode 233 to access show notes and get your copy. Ally, I have loved every moment of this conversation, but I can't leave with just asking you if there's anything else you want to share.
I think we covered it. I feel the same as you. I mean, we could talk for hours and hours and hours about this topic, but I hope
We'll have to have
people
another
have the courage to
Yeah.
pick up the pen, and I hope people find some peace and some clarity from their experience with the process.
Awesome. Ally, how can everyone stay connected to you?
I mean, grab a copy of the book. It's available now, so go order your copy. And then also Instagram. I'm pretty active on Instagram. You can find me at Ally Fallon, or you can find us also at findyourvoice.com.
Ally Fallon, I just found you. I'm following you right now.
Yes, I'll follow you back.
Awesome. Ally, again, what a fun conversation. Guys, please, again, wintoday.tv/episode 233. Get a copy of Ally's brand new book. It's available right now. Ally, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.